Hello everyone! So, ever since I got an iPhone in 2024, I was using an app called UTM SE, which is a full system emulator that emulates PCs and computers of various architectures based on QEMU. And during the time frame from 2024 to today in 2026, I have tested various operating systems on it, from Windows to classic macOS and everything in between, and in general how the app works. In this video, I will present my findings and impressions on how the app works, and if it's worth using it, based on my experiences with it. So with that said, let's begin. First things first, when you look into UTM SE and in general UTM on iOS and iPadOS platforms, you see that there are two versions of the app, UTM and UTM SE, and the reason for that is that one has just-in-time compilation, henceforth known as JIT, and the other doesn't. The reason this is significant is that UTM, by virtue of having it, requires sideloading and also turning on JIT, which is somewhat complex and may also require having a computer nearby, while UTM SE does not. UTM SE, due to not having JIT capabilities, is approved on the App Store, but the trade-off is without JIT, performance is going to be slower and also suffer. That's why the SE in UTM SE stands for Slow Edition. Now, the experience of creating a virtual machine itself on UTM SE is quite good. All you would need to do is click the plus button in the top left corner. Click New Machine, and then you would have the option of choosing pre-configured options of classic macOS, Windows or Linux, or choose to set up a custom virtual machine in which you make all the configurations yourself. And since I tend to do the last one, I will show you how it's done. Once you choose custom, unless you specify expert mode, you'll be given 6 machine types of various architectures, which would correspond to the type of operating system you want to install. Macintosh Quadra 800 and Power Macintosh G4 being used for Motorola 68K or Power PC macOS, and the Intel i440FX and Intel ICH9 based PCs being used for x86 32-bit and x86 64 versions of Windows and Linux, keeping in mind that i440FX is better for older operating systems and ICH9 is better for newer ones. There is also an ARM64 machine type as well as a RISC-V one if you want to use that, but I don't have experience with it, so I cannot comment on it. Once you selected the type of machine you want to emulate, you can choose the RAM amount. I play it safe and usually stick to 1 GB of RAM, which is reported as 1024 MB. As well, you could choose to give higher amounts of RAM. You will get warnings about too much RAM use, and therefore potential termination by iOS. You can also choose to assign how many CPU cores you want used in the VM, but I leave it at default. After that, you can also choose the boot device, to which I leave it at CD/DVD image. Keep in mind, this does require you to have an ISO or .img file of the operating system you wish to install. You can also browse for the OS image if you want to, which I would recommend if you want to boot into it. In options, you can also choose to specify if you want to use UEFI boot or not, and this is useful because in older operating systems, UEFI does not work, so being able to turn that off is useful. After that, you specify storage, in which case you specify how big the virtual disk will be, and you also specify if you want to have a shared directory, which I leave blank. After that, you can name the virtual machine by selecting the name in the information area and name it however you want, and then you review settings and click the save button in the top right of the screen if you're happy with your choices. From there, you can turn on the virtual machine and install the operating system. Anyways, regarding performance, I would say that it would vary by the operating system you're running and how old or lightweight it is. What I mean by this is that the older the operating system is, the better it will run. Things like Windows 11 and Windows 10 can technically be emulated by UTM SE and even boot to the setup and recovery screens, but it's going to be very slow and as a result very annoying. But operating systems like MS-DOS or Windows 3.1, Windows 95 and 98, and even later operating systems versions like Windows XP or Windows Server 2008 will run okay. Even operating systems like Mac OS 9 and the PowerPC version of Mac OS 10 Tiger 10.4 will run well. And regarding MS-DOS, I also tried FreeDOS and it ran well on UTM SE. So if you stick to older and less demanding operating systems, the emulation will be better and faster. Though the problem is that installing the operating systems in itself can be painfully slow, and that can be annoying. The good thing is that after the installation process is done, the virtual machine itself is faster. Not as fast as it could be if Apple allowed the JAT, but still better than during the installation. For example, the Windows Server 2008 virtual machine I have. It is still fast enough to where I can run Task Manager and Command Prompt if need be, and also CPU-Z if I really wanted to. However, when it comes to my experiences, there's less luck when it comes to the Supermium browser, in which case while it did run, it managed to crash the virtual machine in the process and make it blue screen. Still though, the virtual machine is able to run and is also able to run effectively, so if you need to test something with Windows Server 2008, it is a good option in my opinion. I also think, based on my experiences, that Windows 7 would run reasonably well, but I wouldn't try my luck with any Windows versions after it due to how long it would take to install and the limitations UTM SE has. Speaking of which, there are many limitations of UTM SE, of which the most notable one is the lack of JAT, which tanks performance, but there are also other limitations and drawbacks. The first of these being that due to how iOS and iPadOS memory management works, if you attempt to assign amounts of RAM higher than 1 GB to the virtual machine, you will get a warning, at least in my case. This makes running more recent versions of Windows a bit painful and impractical. In addition to it being slower and not being able to give as much RAM as you want to your virtual machines, you should also remember that when using UTM SE while on battery power, you will notice that the battery percentage of your iOS and iPadOS device will decrease more quickly than it would normally, with any other iOS applications, at least in my experience. So that is something to keep in mind. It would also depend on what system you are emulating and if said emulation is particularly demanding. Regarding the amounts of virtual machines you can run, I'm not sure what the situation is on iPad and if UTM SE supports multi-instance, but on iPhone you will only be able to run one virtual machine at a time. So if you expect to be able to run 2 or more virtual machines concurrently on iPhone, you will be disappointed. Another limitation of UTM SE is that you will not have USB sharing whatsoever, so you'll not be able to plug in external drives and such and have them be seen by the virtual machine as you would with a virtualization software on macOS or Windows. Lastly, a thing that I want to note is that when using UTM SE, and in particular storing multiple virtual machines, it will use up your storage on iPhone and use up a lot. So if you're using an iPhone with a lower storage capacity, say 64 GB, you will be at risk of running out of storage, so that is something to remember. Overall, my conclusions are, despite the limitations of UTM SE, and there are many, it is still the best option we have for running virtual machines on iOS and iPadOS devices, as you don't need to sideload or resign every 7 days, at least if you're using a free Apple developer account. And also, it is pretty much the only option we have on the App Store. It does what it needs to do, and given that on iPhone and iPad app stores, it's advertised as UTM SE Retro PC Emulator, it does that job quite well, and even punches above its weight in terms of what it can emulate and how modern it can go. So if you want to run virtual machines on your iPhone or iPad, and maybe play around with some older operating systems, I would recommend it. However, be prepared to deal with the many limitations this app has, and know what its limits are. If you're prepared and you know how to deal with the limitations, your experience with the app will at least be half decent. If you don't, well, it won't be a good experience. With that being said, this has been Igor MGTOW and Video Games. Like and subscribe and click the bell notifications on YouTube if you enjoyed the video, and follow me on odyssey.com, migto.tv, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Rumble. And join my Discord server, and bye bye. Thanks for watching.